Welcome everyone to Mail Fuzz TV. I am Peter, that is Connor, and we are going to talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 2, Episode 12. It's called The Alternate. So spoilers for the episode as always. And in this one, we get to meet the doctor that researched Odo upon his discovery on Bajor. Dr. Mora is his name, so I guess I don't know if he's going to keep popping up in the show. He might pop up again. It's kind of left open in a way that he could at the end of this episode, but Dr. Mora is his name. So yeah, as the sort of the description implied, there's maybe a discovery here that kind of is related to Odo and lets us get to know a little bit more about him. Maybe not in the way I thought we were going to, but it certainly did add some lore to, no pun intended, because it's because Data's alternate is lore. I didn't mean that, but it occurred to me as I said it.
Uh-huh.
I'm a natural poet, you see. These beautiful thoughts just come vomiting out my mouth. No? Okay. What did you think of the episode, Connor?
I thought it was pretty good for the most part. A couple of little nitpicks here or there, but mostly pretty good.
Yeah, because I read the description last time, and I thought, oh, that sounds like it might potentially be fairly important, but I will admit the average rating on IMDb wasn't that hot, so I thought, okay, I'll temper my expectations. I didn't tell you that, I kept that to myself, but I tempered my expectations and went in, and for the most part, I still found myself really into it. There's definitely a couple of weird little things, or stuff that I'd have maybe liked embellished in a different way, but for the most part, there was a couple of pretty memorable moments with Odo. When he gets upset and his face like melts, that was like a horror movie style moment.
That,
yeah, that was very good. Plus, there's some like really early T-1000-esque watery CG as he's melting around, which holds up better than it should probably, just because by its nature, like moving water, while it's clearly CG, it doesn't. It works with CG, early CG, a lot better than any sort of solid object would if it was CG. You know, there's a reason why the T-1000, well, obviously the T-1000 has better effects than this because it was a big budget movie. There's a reason why it holds up relatively well compared to other early CG, is because it's just doing a liquidy thing as opposed to...
It's an easier effect to replicate. Yeah.
So that stuff is interesting. Yeah, so the basic gist of this is that the doctor shows up, Dr. Moore shows up on the station. It's an interesting scene, actually, at the start of the episode, because we start with a very classic Odo-Quark scene, where Quark's trying to sell his new holodisc, like, hey, this is the death of a famous Ferengi here.
I think he's saying it's part of his ashes, essentially.
Is that what he's saying? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the guy who created the portable holodisc.
That's what he was saying. Okay.
It's his ashes, or well, not ashes, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we've heard it referenced before that Ferengi, when they die, they cut up their bodies and like sell off little bits of them. And Odo comes in, kind of ruins the little sales pitch that he's making, and it's a typical Odo Quark scene, right? And Odo kind of flips it where he's kind of playing with his food a little bit, where he's like, hey, here's 3 bars of gold pressed platinum. I'm interested. And Quark's like, no, you're pulling my leg. Like, no. I actually am quite fascinated by how different species and races deal with their deaths of their loved ones. And like, you know, the Ferengi cutting them up and selling them off is fascinating to me.
I've got a place reserved in my collection ready for you.
Yeah. But then he closes his hand just as Quark's taking the bait and says, however, one little detail, how sure are you that this is actually the guy you're saying it is? And Quark's like, I'm positive. Like, yes, but he's still alive. What? And then Quark is like, oh, I've been robbed here too, Odo. I thought this was really, I've been conned. So this is
genuinely.
Yeah, it's very amusing up until this point. But I think what makes the reason why this is done the way it is, why we're getting such a typical classic Odo Quark scene, is that when Dr. Mora enters the scene, the way Odo, not literally, and this I need to specify this with Odo, the way he melts immediately to his presence, to like his dad's just showing up and he's now kind of awkward, he doesn't know how to like handle. It's like he's so confident typically as Odo that as soon as this Dr. Mora is around, he's immediately uncomfortable. And Quark, he smells it. He smells that blood in the water. He starts like chatting this guy up. He's like, oh, you're an old friend. I could tell. Let me get you a drink, sir. And tries to start prying, tries to be very nice, but there's a bit of that quirk, cheeky, like an angle behind it. And even calls him his dad at one point, which Odo immediately says, "No, he's not my dad," which clearly sets up the main theme that we're going to be dealing with this episode is the idea of Odo accepting not so much that this guy's his father per se, because I don't think he has to accept that, but realizing that a lot of the complicated feelings he has about this guy is very similar to how a lot of people have with their parents.
Like, for better or worse, this was a formative figure in his experience of being raised.
Yeah, because he never like says this out loud, and I kind of appreciate that he never says this out loud, but I kind of get the assumption here that Odo is particularly annoyed when someone suggests that this guy is his father, not just for all the reasons you'd expect, but primarily because I think he's like, no, you don't understand, this isn't a father-son relationship. I have mixed feelings about this man, not realizing that lots of other people feel that exact way about their father or one of their parents.
But it's so weird because it plays multiple times over the episode. It plays it for that, but it also plays it on a comedy angle as well. There's a bit with Dax where they're on the ship together, and Dr. Mora just starts interrupting and like telling embarrassing stories, basically.
Yeah, it's exactly it's the parent embarrassing their kid, and Odo behind him almost like throws a little huff and just goes quiet because he's annoyed that he keeps getting interrupted. Yeah. So he just turns around. So it really plays up that angle. And the funny thing is that, from what little we've heard about this, like, we've heard obviously he was in a lab in Bajor for some time before he got his appointment on the station, and we have just recently saw flashbacks to his first his first job as the constable, if you will, on the station. But it definitely made it difficult, I think, for us as the audience to sort of say, like, how much should we like this guy? Because he's being kind of nice about things, but at the same time, does he just want his experiment back? And that was sort of a thought I was wrestling with throughout the entire episode, to the point where there's a pivotal plot moment later in the story where I genuinely thought he was lying to manipulate Odo, and then it turned out to be true, but I would have bet money that he was just lying because he wanted him back in his lab.
I know exactly which bit you're talking about, because I was the same. I'm like, but even like right towards the end, I'm still like, I don't know. I know how he came around at the end and how he sees it now, but I still don't know at what point those intentions shifted.
Well, I think it's because there's a scene with Dax again, where it's right before that scene where I thought he was lying, where he basically says to Dax, all these years I thought he was, he would struggle on his own, that he'd come crawling back to me one day in the lab. And part of the episode up until this point is that he's seen Odo actually function with, the various crew members, with the commander, and be confident and be good at his job and have this sense of authority and do everything he's supposed to do. Like Cisco listens to him. There's a moment where Odo just says, "Hey, sir, until we've sorted this out, we should close the promenade." And Cisco, without question, it just says, "I'll give the order." Like, he has that sway with people he works with. And it's like, oh, he's actually flourishing. He's good at what he does up here. He doesn't need me anymore. And when he says to Dax, I think I have to accept that he's just never going to come back to the lab. I took that as a lead-in to him thinking, oh, I need to trick him back. I need to ruin what life he has here, so he'll come crawling back to me. And that's what I thought the next scene was, where he tries to convince Odo that he's actually doing a bit of a Jekyll and Hyde thing, which we'll get into all that plot, but the fact that it seems that in the end, no, he actually was seriously meaning that when he said that to Dax. Now he is accepting that this is his life now, and he wants to still be a part of it in a more corresponding way with Odo, and he wants to hear what's important to Odo and not just what he wants to tinker with and experiment and figure things out. So I'll give it this. As much as it's not a complete knockout episode, I think the relationship is very complex, and I certainly was thinking about it a lot by the end of the story.
I think that's why I say it's a pretty good episode, despite whatever the rating is on IMDb. Like, I think there's a fair maybe mismatch of expectations from the description, right? Of like, but I think it's a pretty important episode still for Odo's personal history, in a different way to what we've had so far. And to give him that more human relationship with someone, even if he might not have felt it at the time, I think, by the end of this episode, he definitely is looking at that relationship differently, and I think that's pretty important for him to have that those outside links. It's not just our crew on the station, and it's not just Cardassians that we saw him working with before.
Yeah, and it also leads to little moments where Dax, even when she's having that conversation with Mora, she says that Odo is like he's an important person up here. Like, we need him, right? He's irreplaceable. Like, he's so important to the way this place functions. So it's almost like an Odo appreciation episode in a lot of ways, even though I think maybe the thing that most impressed me by the character of Mora at the end, it's not just that he makes this change and says, hey, I want to hear about what you care about and, be in your life in some way and understand how your life's progressing. It's the fact that he never even tries to suggest that Odo should come back to the lab, right? Because, clearly what just happened was very dangerous and we have to figure out, and it's maybe not safe for you to be here. He doesn't even say that. He just says, I want to hear more about your life here, implying that he still accepts that he's staying here despite whatever's just happened in the main plot. And I think that was probably the little detail that I liked the most at the end, was just the way he just never even tried to manipulate it, because I was so convinced he was doing that earlier in a more malicious way.
I agree. I think it makes me like Mora retrospectively a lot more over the whole episode. It makes him a much more nuanced character, where it's like, oh, he wasn't just being manipulative the whole episode. Like, there's some real genuine feeling in there as well, clearly. And I think you maybe overlook it at first because you're expecting the manipulation. You're thinking it's all an act, but I don't think it is. Like, but by the end, you look back, I don't think that was all an act. To
be fair, to actually give the episode some credit here, I think it's kind of genius, and what you just described is basically viewing it from Odo's perspective, where he doesn't like this guy, he's mad that he showed up, he's expecting the turn. So we're kind of conflating how Odo feels with how these types of characters often turn out on episodes like this, and because of that, we are in the same boat as Odo, suspecting that he's a bad guy, that he's going to reveal his true nasty colours, and then when he doesn't, it's like, oh, that's actually a surprise at the end. And it's kind of, that's how Odo feels about it at the end. He's like, oh, you're kind of treating me with some decency. Maybe you've finally realized that I'm a life form, that I have my own wants and desires and whatever. So that's actually quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think it is very important to note that the way Mora treats him, it's not like treating a test subject, because I think it's very easy to say, oh, he just views him as an experiment. And I don't think it is like that. The language used is like that, but it is much more akin to the way you typically see a parent with their child not accepting that the child becomes their own person, right, as they grow up. It's a lot closer to that than it is a scientific experiment, which is, but just because of the language that they use here, it makes it sound like that. But I don't think it was ever meant to be portrayed like that.
Yeah, which is also, I guess the one caveat to that is how the relationship started, because he literally talks about how at first he didn't realize he was a life form because he just saw a puddle of goo, basically, and he tells a story about how he mimicked the petri dish or whatever it was and just made another one of those, and that's the first time he realized, oh, I'm working with something that has intelligence. And it wasn't until a bit later, where Odo was able to maybe take some form or whatever. I mean, hell,
and then show that there was some sentience in there as well. Yeah.
Yeah, going back to those tropes of like how a parent talks to their kid when they see them after a long time when they're an adult. One of the first things he says to him is like, "Oh, you've never quite got the ears right." It's like just a little critique. It's like, imagine running to your mother when you've not seen her for a long time. She's like, "Oh, you never clean your ears properly," and starts, wiping them or whatever. It's like that type of little critique, that little moment.
It's exactly like that. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, there's some smart things happening here, even if the whole main plot, which we'll get into here, which is he wants a runabout, which Sisko approves.
Very
quickly. He just doesn't want to talk to his son anymore about listening to the Klingon opera, which again thematically, having him talk to his son about something his son doesn't want to do and saying, hey, this. I know it doesn't seem like you'll ever need to know about Klingon opera. Maybe one day you'll work with Klingon. Like, it's important. Yeah.
I did like as well, where it's like, well, so you're just going to make me do it just because you suffered through it? And it's just like, yeah, basically.
the shit-eating grin in his face as he says yes to that question.
And then just sits down like, yeah.
Yeah, I did enjoy that. It was like, you know what? I don't intend on having kids, but if I did, I would relish them having to sit through some of the crappy Shakespeare I had to sit through when I was a teenager.
A lot of good Shakespeare.
I disagree, in the words of Tommy Wiseau.
Well, just like Tommy Wiseau, you are wrong.
I mean, he's wrong about many things. That's what makes him so wonderful. But yeah, so he appears to run about, and Dax goes with, and it's Mora and his assistant who go. Odo's there as well, of course. But them telling stories on the runabouts, what we were talking about earlier. And when they get down, the planet's kind of stable for a bit. They find like a monolith-style structure, and they also find a little sort of vegetative life form, which might be the same sort of thing as Odo. It's kind of hard to tell. Like, they're not really sure. But they before they even get
terrible practices from the scientists here.
I mean, yeah, but like...
Let's just... Oh, there's a monument here in this place that seems important. Yeah, let's beam it up. Test take with us.
Well,
let's study it here. Let's not take some readings. Or we can translate it later. No, just take the whole thing.
To be fair, the planet does get very unstable immediately, where earthquakes, volcanic...
This was also a bit weird. It felt like it got unstable because they removed this pillar.
That's true. That's an argument to be made. I didn't really think of that. I just thought because they mentioned before they went down that there's a lot of volcanic activity. So I thought, oh, they've came down in a moment of peace, but it's a planet that's often rumbling.
Yeah, and do they keep hold of this pillar by the end? Because it doesn't really become relevant again at any point, does it?
No, it's just kind of there in the lab a few times. At one point, Odo thinks it's moved, but then Dax is like, "No, I hadn't moved. It was in my way." And Odo's convinced. Wait, did that move on its own? Is that a life form? No,
it grew legs and walked. Yeah,
calm down, Odo. But they end up all breathing in this, cloud of whatever that's coming out of the ground when they're down there. So they beam up. They barely make it up, and Odo seems to be fine because he doesn't have a respiratory system in a traditional sense. The others are all kind of out of it for a bit. They're fine after like a day and being in med bay for the most part. But
also they're like, yeah, he's possibly from this planet. Yeah, but he can probably take it different to what we can.
Yeah. Of course, it turns out, though, everything that happens to Odo later on is because of this stuff. It just affected him very differently than it did any of the other life forms that were down there. It kind of forces him to become effectively a monster. Like, whenever he goes into his bucket to rest, he then turns into this, Mr. Hyde version of himself, where he's sneaking through vents and forming big tentacles that are trying to, kill, well, the Doctor, Mora, mainly. Which, obviously, we don't know that for a lot of the episode. For most of the episode, we're convinced that what this little life form that they've picked up is multiplying and is broken out of its container on its own, and that itself is sneaking around, which does lead to some fun stuff, like O'Brien sneaking through the vents, trying to find it. It's a very it's almost like a comedy version of a scene from Alien, where they're sneaking through the vents looking for the xenomorph.
The noise, he's tracking it by almost.
Yeah, and Cisco and it's how Dax or Kira who are talking to him, and they're like, "Hey, are you alright, Chief? What's going on? What's going on?" And he's like, "Oh, don't tell Keiko I did this, right? I lied to her about what I do during the day because I don't think she wants to know. She worries." And
then he basically just gets gunked by dead alien,
by the dead version of whatever this life form was, which never actually answers the question: is this the same type of life form as Odo?
No,
it never actually addresses that.
They're like, it's got the same base building blocks. They're like, yeah, genetically cousins at best. It's not that similar, but it's clearly from the same. They're like, yeah, it's probably from the same planet. It's the same planet, family of life form. But
yeah, in the same way that everything on Earth is carbon based, this thing is silicon based, the same way that Odo is.
Yeah, and it has some level of shapeshiftery ability. Not necessarily control like that, but it does change state to some degree.
Yeah, so they're looking into that, but obviously they find that it's dead, and it's not until the Doctor's attacked in medbay with a giant tentacle. Well, technically it's Bashir that gets attacked because he's there and awake. The Doctor's just lying there asleep. But yeah. It's a whole big moment where he fires a laser at it. It's a horror movie scene. Because I was wondering why we were sticking with them, because we get a scene with him and Dax where Dax just kind of says, "Hey, do you want to get this type of drink before it's time to call it a night?" And he's like, your replicator or mine, which is a very nerdy Star Trek line. Like, I could just imagine the hardcore Trekkie saying that line to try and chat someone up.
It has never once worked.
No, and then she's like, I was thinking the promenade, and she has a smirk in her face, like she knew he was going to make that suggestion. And when she walks away, he's like, she enjoys torturing me, but one day I'll stop chasing and then we'll see. Like he's like concocting his master plan to woo Dax. It's all very harmless and entertaining though. But then the tentacle jumps out and he has to fend it off with a laser. So the whole time Odo's like investigating this, and it's not until Dax is investigating some residue that's been left behind where the Doctor seemingly recognizes that it belongs to Odo. But like I said, I genuinely thought he was lying when he was trying to tell Odo this. I thought this is just all a play, because when Odo says, "Oh, I'm going to go and talk to Bashir," Dr. Moore jumps in and says, "Whoa, no, they won't understand. They'll put you in a zoo. They'll do this and they'll do that. I'm the only one who understands you."
It sounds so manipulative.
It does.
I think he's actually he's wrong, but I think he's being genuine.
In hindsight, it seems to be the case, yeah.
Yeah, like I say, like he is wrong. They wouldn't just throw him as, you know, we know these characters better than that. Like we know that, at least with Odo, it would be different. But I think it's not a completely unfair fear for you know, the Doctor to have that.
Oh, look at it this way. You know, look at it this way. Jonathan Kent worrying about his son Clark being thrown in a lab and tested for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
Kind of like that, even though in this case he literally had Odo in a lab and was testing him for most of his life. But ignore that part. Same kind of fear though.
It is. I think he's like, no. I did it to not, you know, to help you discover who you were, almost, right? You know, not just to, oh, I'm gonna lock. He's afraid they're just gonna lock him away because he's dangerous now.
I mean, to be fair, I do think there's an element of guilt here where he realizes that a lot of his motivation was for his own personal scientific sense of discovery. I think that's kind of part of what the ending is. It's him accepting, no, I actually want to care about you as a person now, you know?
Yeah.
But Odo gets so frazzled when he's hearing this that he starts to melt, and it's the best visual of the whole episode is his face just melting. You see him getting kind of sweaty at first.
Like, oh, that looks wrong.
Yeah. But then he gets properly melty, like he's like a candle just dripping in heat. So this is really good. And then it becomes about, okay, we have to stop Odo. And they pull no punch. I mean, Cisco says, okay, we're going to set this trap. They've basically just deduced that Dr. Mora's who Odo's going after. And even in this Hulk-like state, if you want to call it that, he still kind of goes after someone that he has a personal connection to. And that's why he's been going after Mora. So they set a trap and they're going to use him as bait in the promenade. And Cisco says to Kira, like, okay, set your phasers to maximum stun. But if it doesn't stop him, if he tries something, then set them to kill. And Kira's like, sir, it's Odo.
Like, really? And he's like, hey, we gotta do what we gotta do sometimes.
Yeah, he's like, that's the order. And she's like, okay. And of course, when they zap him in their containment field, it does kind of like make him all go blobby, and he's like, whatever. And ultimately, eventually just sort of morphs back into Odo in a weak state, and Dr. Moore holds him and says, oh, we've got a lot of, you know, talking to do or whatever. It's a decent moment. I mean, if anything, honestly, maybe the one complaint you could have about the main plot is that because we take so long to get to this point where Odo's went Hulk mode and we have to hunt him down and get him, it's so late in the episode that they have to do it relatively quickly in the scheme of the plot, which is maybe why this stuff feels a little bit rushed at the end.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I might say that. But generally, as a character piece for Odo, it is interesting, and I do think there's some nuance to how the Dr. Mora character is represented. I think maybe some of it you could critique and say, oh, us completely misreading his intentions is a failure of the script, but at the same time, I almost feel like it kind of fits with what Odo looks at him as.
The thing, like, I don't know if it is a failure of the script. I don't know if it's, like, even if we're being generous and saying, oh, it puts us on the same level as Odo, we might be being overly generous there.
I think there's an argument to say that it should feel 50-50 where we're not sure, as opposed to we are adamant it's this, and it isn't.
That's fair, but it could be a very intentional misdirect. Like, they might want us to think it's weird. Like, they could want you going down that route. I don't, you know, it's hard to say for sure because it's such a dealer's choice, right? And like, hey, which way do they want to play it? And we can critique which one we like more or don't, but like, I don't know which one they intended. So to say that, it was like this, and when it was meant to be like that, it's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel a little flawed in some ways, but it's kind of like that episode we had with the refugees a couple ago, where even the flawed episode ended up being really interesting anyway, because there's just so many, just like intricate ideas at play that it's still easy to sort of get lost in it and think about it and get invested in what's going on. And I think that's another example of this here.
I think the good stuff here massively outweighs the flaws.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I had a good time dealing with this, and I also like that. Not that I really ever suspected that Odo was going to leave for a while or die at the end of the episode, but they do have a point of like giving him either a moment with every other cast member of the adults anyway, or at least have the other cast members talk about how they feel about him, because he has a moment or two with Dax. He has a moment with Quark, that opening scene to give us a classic, Quark Odo scene. He has, moments with Cisco where he's asking for the runabout and sort of saying that's important to him because it might give him answers about himself. He has, a scene with Bashir. He has the scene with O'Brien where O'Brien's trying to talk about like how they're going to find this thing, and like it goes out of its way to give him a moment with every other cast member, just so that you kind of feel like, oh, maybe he's going to say goodbye for a while. He may not die, but like maybe he will go back to the lab and miss like 5 episodes or something. Now he's not clearly, but it was a possibility.
I agree. It's one of those that works both ways, and that it works to add to that idea, but also on a more functional level, it's there to again remind you all these personal connections that Odo has with everyone here.
Yeah, if nothing else, it's there to remind us that like all these people respect him and like look at him for his expertise sounds like the wrong word, but like they all look at him and trust him with the job that he's supposed to do, and they treat him with a sense of respect.
I realize some of the moments where Mora realizes that. There's one where he kind of walks in and I was like, you're uncomfortable, like you or whatever it is he says. And I was like, well, you can tell that just from the way the way I'm talking, my tone of voice, on my body language. Oh yeah,
Odo says that to him. You mean Odo immediately recognizes that he's uncomfortable. Yeah,
and Odo's like, yep, and Mora's impressed. Like, oh, that's actually quite impressive how you've taken what we taught you to analyze scientifically and you've applied it to your detective work. And again, it's that seeing Odo as an individual person, taking those skills and doing something different with it. But again, it is just all these little ways that it's showing Odo being good at what he does, and a respected part of the community at the same time.
And to move away from the character for a second, obviously that's the meat of this episode, and we've had a good time talking about it. Larger implications of this as a possibility for someone of his race to be an angry monster. Like, I don't know if this is exactly what the Dominion are going to be like, but it certainly paints an angrier side to his species, if nothing else.
Yeah, the idea that this is caused by this gas on the planet, we were assuming, or that's what they're assuming anyway.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there could be a lot more layers to it than that. It could be more a sense of it just heightens part of his like system that he's not used to. Maybe, it could be like almost like a reverse Vulcan thing. We know how Vulcans have all suppressed their emotions, but if you rarely see them like actually tap into them, they get into a violent rage or whatever. What if the Dominion are all just tapped into their angriest or their most like fascist side, or again, I don't know personality wise what the Dominion are like yet. I'm actually excited to discover that when we get there, but like maybe this is like tapping into like a potential they all have, and maybe we'll see with them that they are very, very evil or malicious or whatever.
Yeah, that's definitely an option. But this thing, Odo's such an outlier, right? In that he was raised in quite a scientific. We hear a lot about it this time, and there's this very methodical fashion, right? And I think it's safe to assume that does not happen in the Dominion in general.
No, probably. I think the other really interesting thing about this potentially is that when it becomes down to like Odo being like with our team of characters, when all this stuff starts to happen with people from his race, this idea that Odo, despite his upbringing, is actually going to be a lot more sympathetic and human than any of those characters on the Dominion. Just partly maybe because he just has good people around him who have, instilled better ideas into him, where he's learned this. Because I think we talked about this as soon as like he was introduced as having this sense of right and wrong. It's like he's always talked about that as just something that's really ingrained in him, and how the Dominion might like manipulate that, and they'll have that same impulse, but they'll read it very differently, of like a sense of order and like control. Whereas with Odo, it's very much a sense of justice, where he's like he wants to maintain order amongst everyone. So it's and it also, I mean, the episode actually also pokes at his discomfort at anyone like showing him affection or giving him a compliment. Like Dr. Moore points that out a couple of times. Oh, you don't like that he's just called you Constable, and he's like, I tolerate that nickname, and I'm like, no, it's a sign of respect. Like they're saying it because they respect you. You should get comfortable with that. So, yeah. Now I think there's a lot of smart touches in the writing. So something as simple as showing Cisco with Jake, and like him being a father, and his son being like, "Oh, Dad, you're being a dick," like that kind of attitude. And then that effectively kind of being what Odo is to Dr. Mora for the episode. Yeah. I mean, obviously in a more serious way, but still, there's definitely a comparison to be made.
Oh, yeah, there absolutely is. And so the episode is making those comparisons very explicitly.
Yeah. So, yeah, I have a lot of nice things to say about it. I think it did a lot of smart things. So,
yeah.
I'm excited. I'm excited for more Deep Space Nine. It'll be a couple of episodes though before we're back to Deep Space Nine. We're doing 2 TNG in a row just to follow the original release order, and then after that they basically just alternate until TNG's done. So it'll be pretty straightforward then. But there'll be 2 Next Generations in a row, and then we'll be back to Deep Space Nine. But we will look and see what the next episode of Deep Space Nine is, as a little tease, as we always do. So the title is Armageddon Game.
Yeah, I'm so in.
I mean, it sounds interesting. If nothing else, here's the description on IMDb. Chief O'Brien, who still doesn't particularly like Dr. Bashir. Oh, I love that that's a running thing. Oh, yes.
Oh,
yeah, he's still got
this is going to be good.
The squash game still pissing him off. Must rely on him when the two are stranded on a planet and O'Brien is infected with a deadly, fast-moving disease. Oh, well, get some
this
more.
Could be fun.
More O'Brien and Bashir bonding. I'm not mad at the suggestion. Yeah. So, cool. All right. Well, that is when we come back to Deep Space Nine. But let us know what you thought of this episode of Deep Space Nine in the comments. Like, subscribe, all the usual things you say on YouTube. And, of course, you can support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep it all coming. There's a bunch of bonuses over there for all the movie podcasts and stuff. Go check out the movie podcast over at MailFuzz Movies, including the science fiction movie podcast, The Atomic Cinema Experiment, which might be most relevant to your interest if you're listening to a Star Trek discussion. So go and have a look. But that is us. So thank you very much for joining. We do appreciate it. Keep watching Star Trek. And somewhere out there, there's a very calm and collected Odal doppelganger who did not turn into a tentacle monster and try and kill his daddy this episode.